Okay, welcome to the WuBlockchain podcast. For the latest blockchain and crypto insights, subscribe to WuBlockchain on YouTube and follow us on Twitter. Stay informed and join the conversation. Today, we have the pleasure to join by Eva, director of the Graph Foundation. We will explore the Graph's journey and exciting innovations. Eva, welcome. Can you briefly introduce yourself and share the development history of the Graph?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Eva, like you said. I'm originally from Canada, and I started my career off in management consulting. I had studied economics and was really interested in solving problems for businesses as a method of learning. I always think of consulting as a bit of a boot camp, especially if you're younger when you're consulting. So when I was learning about Ethereum and Web3, I was still working on payments initiatives for large banks in the US. And I was learning about crypto and thinking, wow, this is really the solution that they should be building on. And it was way too early. So I decided to leave consulting and join Web3, the Ethereum community in particular, and have been here for about 6 years now, and had hopped around several different projects and had been, looking for something to sink my teeth into that was a bit more important as a longer term problem, building a longer term solution. And really the graph was that place, and have been working with the graph now for over 5 years.
And what can you tell us about the Graph Foundation and your role at the foundation?
Yeah, so the graph is a decentralized ecosystem as much as we are a decentralized network. The graph is, in layman's terms, providing access to data, Web3 data. You could think of the graph as the Google of blockchains, where all data is indexed and queryable. So anybody who wants to, ask questions about what happens on chain, or if they want to build applications on that information, you can do so really easily with the graph. We have something called a subgraph. A subgraph is a standardized API, which basically allows you to query the blockchain data of any blockchain really simply with GraphQL. So this is basically how we started with the graph. And upon the launch of the decentralized network, which allowed hundreds of indexers to actually start indexing that data, prior to that, we were just a centralized service. At the time of the network launch, we also launched the Graph Foundation. So I was a part of the original team that launched the network. I think there was only 16 of us. And at that time, we recognized the need for another entity to basically bootstrap the ecosystem, steward it into a lot of the new initiatives related to governance, grants, growth. And so the foundation has been taking charge on that front to broaden the community growth, enable funding for different kinds of projects. We do a lot of sort of talking with the community, understanding their needs across the tech stack. So we've got both a non-technical community as well as an indexing community, as well as a subgraph and dApp development community, basically to ensure that all aspects of the ecosystem are flourishing. And the Graph Foundation currently continues to focus on those objectives: governance, growth, managing the treasury, and supporting the core devs. But we also are very focused on basically what is the next level for the needs of Web3 ecosystem members. So, the subgraph and kind of the graph toolkit has fit into a very specific problem set that devs have at the moment, which is, hey, I need to build this, dApp on blockchain. How do I get the data? The graph gets me that data using a subgraph. But we're starting to expand how we view the problem set within Web3. So instead of just focusing on, APIs and hosting, we're thinking about how do we serve the developer more holistically? What are the other problems that developers face? Not even just Web3 developers, but like Web2 developers face when they try to build with blockchains. Because one thing we're noticing is a lot of devs, our teams included, are so biased to the ways that we've been building with crypto, building new applications, that we may not even realize that the tech we're building is not conducive with, the next 1 million developers joining. So we're focusing a lot on basically what does expanding the graph and Web3 actually look like so we can grow the pie.
Oh, cool. For those familiar with the graph, how would you explain what it is and how the protocol work?
Great question. So as I mentioned, we like to call ourselves the Google of blockchains. So with that framing, you can think of us as the indexer, the data provider, the machine in the back end that kind of formulates all of those answers and queries to give you an answer. So anybody can build UIs or front-end applications on top of the graph's data. If you wanted to build something similar to the typical Google search engine, you could do that. We've had a few people experiment by building ChatGPT-like experiences on top of the graph and piloting them to see what's interesting. Basically to better understand what's going on in blockchain data. But if you're just a typical developer, building dApps, you can use the graph for querying data. So if you think about .org, or other dApps, when you see that data, that came from somewhere. It wasn't just directly pulled from blockchains, and it's actually incredibly difficult to pull data from blockchains. And so we act as that standardized layer between an application's front end and the smart contracts they deployed to make it easy for them to access that data.
So what is a knowledge graph and how does it benefit Web3 applications specifically?
Yeah, great question. So like I said, the graph, we're focused at the moment on basically expanding the problem set that we're solving. So like I said, we started with the subgraph, very developer front-end focused use case. It's had product market fit, but we recognize there's a larger need for how people can access blockchain data, because regardless if you're a developer or an analyst, it can be very difficult. But included in that vision is actually way more than blockchain data, because when you think about all the data or information that's useful to you every day, the majority of it is not crypto data. It's not Web3 data. It's things like, oh, my friend texted me, what's my friend's phone number? Or, I need to buy these things for my grocery list. So maybe you want to have the grocery list itself, and then you also want to see the transactions after. And these are just examples of ways that we create data and information every day as humans. So the knowledge graph really is a component of our vision that is to go beyond Web3 data, beyond just blockchain data, which as blockchains go, are very event-driven, meaning that most of the data that blockchains create are once the transaction has been processed, or once the vote has been approved, or maybe another function is called, but it doesn't necessarily capture other important data about the user or the wallet or the behaviors. And so the goal of the knowledge graph really is to create meaning out of the data that we do receive from Web3. So that's the blockchains themselves, but also Web2. So for example, you can think of, a broad set of different data categories where you wish that your representation of that story in both Web2 and Web3 was together, right? Like there's a lot of people working on Web3 social apps. Imagine if all of our other social information could somehow be connected to those social apps. So we want to focus on basically the entire spectrum of data, information, and knowledge. And that means that anything from the blockchain itself to the things that people create is information, whether it's social content or, they're updating facts on a website or they're doing research. And then meaningful data like knowledge is like the connections between all of this. So for example, tracking identity and seeing all the things that matter for that person's identity, whether it's on a blockchain or not, being able to create sort of semblance of connections between people and what they're doing on their own sort of DeFi or art, whatever it might be. And so basically, we want to make sure that regardless of what kind of user you are, regardless of what type of data and information, that you could access all of it from the graph.
Could you explain the role of the GRT token within the graph network? How is utilized by the ecosystem?
Yeah, great question. So the GRT token launched when the network launched, and it is a work utility token. So anybody can stake the token, and there's a few different functions for staking I'll get into. Anybody can stake the token and earn income with their token, and by that way contribute to overall Web3 success. And the graph really thinks of itself as a uniter for contributions and also building in Web3, because we support every chain. So if you're a developer and you want to build on EVA chain, and you don't know if EVA chain has a support ecosystem or if you can build on it, the graph is likely already supporting it to make it easy for you to build. So that's really sort of our value proposition of positioning of GRT, is that we are here for uniting the Web3 ecosystem, and GRT itself is staking on accessing really meaningful data, information, and knowledge in Web3. So by actually staking it yourself, you can contribute to people feeling more secure, developers feeling more secure about relying on that data. In terms of staking itself, you can be an indexer, meaning you run a node, a validator specific to the graph that's running graph software to basically index the data. And so you can stake there, and you can earn fees from customers themselves that are paying for fees for the actual data you're serving, as well as GRT rewards from the network. And then you can also stake as a delegator, which is less hardware, less software involved. Is more of a non-technical role, so you can stake through a website. And by staking on an indexer, the delegator actually increases the indexer's ability to serve queries. So staking is really important because it increases the ability for indexers to provide value to the network. And delegators also earn fees as well.
What are the chains does the graph support now?
Yeah, so we support over 50 chains. You can think of all major L1s, L2s, even a lot of the newer non-EVM chains. And really the goal is to make sure that a developer feels supported throughout their journey. It's still pretty difficult to build in Web3 for many different reasons. The decision around which chain you choose is actually a really important one, because it comes with all of these downstream decisions of what developer tooling is there, who's the ecosystem. And so we want to make sure that high quality developers feel like they're supported, meaning regardless of which chain they are building on, or if they're redeploying their smart contracts on another chain, which often happens, that the same developer tooling they're using, which would be the graph, is accessible and makes it really easy for them to build.
Oh, the graph has recently introduced new data services. Could you provide insights on what these services are and how they enhance the protocol's offerings?
Yeah, absolutely. So we just spoke about chains. So like I said, everything from the Ethereums, the Optimisms, Monads, all of those. So we think of the chain ecosystem as one sort of diverse group of ways that dApp developers can kind of personalize their experience. The other way we think of dApps and individuals personalizing their experience with the graph is by which data services they choose to build with or use. So like I said, we started with the subgraph. This was really our product market fit moment. We were able to make sure that we were helping Web3 and Ethereum specifically grow by allowing really high quality tools to make it into the places of developers, hackathons, that kind of thing. What we're now seeing is that there's a lot of other user types and even a lot of data extraction methods that could be more optimal for different use cases. So for example, we have a team called Streaming Fast that's building substreams in Firehose. It's a complementary addition to the subgraph as a tool, because both of them do different things. Whereas a subgraph is an API, a substream is a raw stream of data. And so there are cases where the type of application somebody's building, they require maybe more real-time data. Maybe that's just the state of the application itself. And so they need streaming real-time data because maybe the nature of the product requires that. And so maybe then they'll use substreams in addition to subgraphs. We also have things called substream powered subgraphs, which is actually the combination of both substreams and subgraphs, because when you do that, you can increase the performance and efficiency of syncing a subgraph significantly. So there's ways for us to sort of cross-utilize the tooling within the graph. And then beyond that, we're already exploring different kinds of ways that developers would like to access data that is supplementary to subgraphs and substreams. So again, depending on their use case, depending on the type of data, this is where knowledge graph also comes in, because we recognize that there's public data, private data, personal data, on-chain data. There's like different kinds of data and sort of trade-off of public versus private. that each dApp has. And so the knowledge graph aims to be also a new data service that's sort of surfacing more than just Web3 data. So maybe it's more meaningful information from Web2. Maybe it's connecting information nodes, from Web3 data with Web2 data and creating more meaning. So applications that want richer data sets are able to get those. And then beyond sort of knowledge graph and kind of the developer focused use cases, we're also looking at what other users need data from Web3. Because when the graph started, obviously, Web3 wasn't really a thing. I would say it still has a ways to go. But at that time, developers building was really the focus of the ecosystem. Let's get more smart contracts developed. Let's get more applications out in the world. Now there's a lot more analysts, business people, even sort of internal business intelligence happening, that the users beyond just a developer include data scientists, analysts, trend watchers. And so we're expanding our use cases to support analysts, anybody that might be a front end or data science background that doesn't want to use GraphQL or Rust. And beyond that, making sure that all types of users, so even the end consumer, someone who's non-technical, non-analytical, could be able to talk to the graph in a way that they could make sense of, and that they could also get valuable information. So our data services expansion really is a bet on making sure that all types of users can access the graph. And there's all these other ways and tools in their toolkit with the graph that they can choose from.
The graph's ecosystem includes eco-development teams. Could you explain how these teams operate and collaborate to drive decentralization?
Yeah, so we've taken a lot of inspiration from the Ethereum community and other Web3 communities, but I think the Ethereum community is the most mature in exemplifying this, which is it's actually more successful to enhance the community's sort of like empowerment and contributions when there's more people doing it together. And the challenge with a centralized team and just having one team is that nobody really cares about what you're doing, right? Like most companies, unless you have their stock, nobody cares. And the thing with a network and an ecosystem is that there's this way that everybody can actually care at different levels, depending on sort of their involvement and contributions. Because the way that crypto networks are built is to be positive sum for our societies. It's much more about creating positive sum value, greater value for the ecosystem, not just the value that one company needs to capture for its own revenue. So I think that psychologically is a big distinction in the way that like Web3 thinks about organizing itself and its contributors and rewarding them versus Web2. And I think that's incredibly important for like the philosophy that we're in. So when the Graph Network launched, we launched with the original team and the foundation. And we quickly realized that there were a lot of ambitious aspects of our roadmap and where we wanted to drive to, that scaling one team or even two teams was just not sufficient because there's different expertises that you need. Sometimes, it's easier to bring on talent or contributors by bringing forward an idea or an RFP, and then a whole team gets excited about that problem rather than hiring individually. And so that was one of the directions I would say that we went into with the multi-core dev grants and just having multiple core devs, really realizing that it's much more beneficial when you have these different teams working together on the same problem rather than potentially competing or just not bringing all their research and development together in a place that's more productive. So, we definitely have our challenges as much as Ethereum has. I think coordinating in public as well as just coordinating so many different people. Even outside of sort of our core developers, we have a pretty robust grants program, a robust community with monthly core developer calls. We've got bi-weekly indexer calls, so anyone who has questions around the indexer updates can go there. But doing all this, I would say, is definitely a positive sum for everybody that's building on the graph as well as the ecosystem, because you can then easily join as well and make sure that there are different expertise, diverse groups of thinking even within the graph that will increase its chance of success, because we aren't just thinking in a narrow way of one small business model or one small user type, but really making sure that there's an entire community that's fulfilled by the vision.
There has been much excitement surrounding the graph's involvement with AI. Could you explain how the graph is integrating AI and what impact it might have on decentralized data?
Yeah, super exciting. So earlier this year, I believe it was Q1, we released a white paper about some of the opportunity areas that we could see the graph with AI. We leverage AI internally for some of our modeling and kind of community services, but really the paper focused on how can we as the graph offer AI services. And we focused on inference as well as agent services as the two potential opportunities. So overall, the assessment was that there is a really interesting sort of network flow and incentive flow within the graph already, because we already have so many data services that running a model or training a model is only slightly additive to the work that an indexer already has to do, because indexers are already syncing nodes of those blockchains. They're already caching a lot of the data that they need for serving queries or that you might need for training a model. And so that was the positioning that we really came from, was like, there's a lot of teams that are kind of staking their existence on the AI use case, which is exciting in itself. But for us, we really think of it as one part of a larger suite of services that anybody should come to the graph and be able to kind of have all their data needs met. So we launched the paper and we also started doing some experimentation. And I think where we're at right now is recognizing that the market is not as far ahead as some of the supply that is in the market, in the sense that there's quite a few AI blockchain projects. There's quite a few decentralized AI ambitious projects at the moment. And we're really interested in kind of taking our time with figuring out what the right use case is and right implementation. Again, because we do have other data services that we're focusing on. We're thinking about ways that AI can actually support the other data services as well, especially the knowledge graph. So still early in that journey, but we did recognize that there definitely is a demand for people wanting to access blockchain data in a more sort of a modular approach, and also integrating AI. I think what we're still figuring out is, what does that demand side look like long term with the intersection of Web3 and AI, not just sort of like AI Web2 focus use cases, which, as we see in the West and the East, are flourishing.
So besides AI, are there any other recent announcements or developments that have you excited about the future of the graph?
Yeah, we haven't done any major announcements recently because honestly, we've just been heads down working. But we are cooking up quite a few interesting things. Like I had said earlier, we're starting to approach the developer as a user more holistically. So rather than just thinking about the API or the specific layer of data access that they need, maybe they want a more streaming extraction framework. All of these are great because we have tools for them, but we're trying to think beyond that. And the problem that we see, and I would not say we're alone. I've spoken to many other layer 2 blockchain teams, a few other protocol teams, and everyone's experiencing the same thing, which is the Web3 developer ecosystem is too darn small. And for the people who've been here for a while, obviously it's grown. So it's not that we're not seeing growth at all, but relative to the number of Web2 developers that exist, relative to the number of developers that we need to actually even build out our visions as an ecosystem worldwide, we don't have enough high quality talent. And so a lot of what we're thinking about now is, before we were thinking of, okay, there are these developers and they need data and they want to build applications. How do we give them that data in the best way, right? And so the subgraph came about, the graph existed. Now we're thinking of the problem a little differently, which is, how do we get more developers building in Web3? Because, I'm sure if you talk to your Web2 developer friends, they've heard of crypto, but there's a reason that they're not entering. There's a reason, for whatever reason it is, that they're choosing to continue to work at their day job, and not joining crypto, or they're choosing not to even participate in hackathons or even learn Solidity on the side. And so there's some larger psychological barrier at play here that's really limiting the value that our entire Web3 ecosystem can create. So the graph is really interested in targeting this problem because for us, the subgraph is just a small part of that larger problem, which is how do we make it easy for anybody to build on blockchains, build in Web3, build apps that are decentralized and censorship resistant and meaningful to the world. And so we want to start building more tooling and infrastructure that focuses on the overall journey of a developer, not just the hosting and the data.
For those who want to contribute to the graph, what are the best ways to get involved with the project?
Great question. So I would say first off, heading to thegraph.com so you can fully understand all the ways that you can get involved depending on if you're a developer. Docs and products are a great place to start because we have a studio. We've got docs for every chain as well as Subgraph, Substreams, Firehose. So all 50 chains are able to be accessed and built on. If you are looking to contribute to the network itself, from thegraph.com, you can check out the indexer or delegator role. And actually, there's multiple different ways that you could delegate across many different UIs in the ecosystem. Thegraph.com is one of them as well. And if you're looking to get more involved in the community, so we've got a grants program, we've got community managers, and we are actually very close to relaunching our advocates program, which we had paused over the summer just to refresh it. So really excited about that. That will be shared, more information will be shared closer to the end of the year. So if you are non-technical, there are ways that basically you can get involved in the ecosystem as potentially a volunteer, maybe helping out in the booth at some hackathons or events, or just joining our calls. And then we're constantly creating opportunities for ways to get for ways that people can get involved depending on their skill level. They can help us test things out. They can help us with curating information and knowledge. And especially with all of the new data services and knowledge graph that we're working on, we're going to see a lot more exciting activity in the community coming soon.
Mm-hmm. And can you expand the move to Horizon? How would you compare this vision with risk-taking initiatives in the market?
Yeah, so Horizon is basically our version 2 of the graph protocol. We've learned quite a bit about what has worked and what hasn't worked for indexers, what is capitally efficient, what isn't. But we have seen a lot of opportunity for more modular ways that people want to interact with the protocol. And so Horizon really is fulfilling that vision and making sure that we can fulfill the desires of other types of data consumers and data providers. Meaning, if you are a data provider, you want to build a new data service, there's this great API you've built, and maybe it's different than existing ones. We want to make it possible for you to be able to serve that data service on the graph. So you can think of the graph as a marketplace. And up until now, we've been the ones, we as in core developers close to sort of working on the protocol day to day, have been the ones to build out the data services. But we think that the world should be able to. There's a lot of different ways that people want to consume data and information. And indexers are also, they have agencies, so they're also able to serve whatever kind of data service they want. And Horizon is us enabling that vision to be possible.
As someone deeply involved in Web3, are there any concerns you have about the direction the space is heading? Where do you think the Web3 community can improve?
This is a tough question because, I think that the growing the pie message that I shared earlier is really maybe the number one most important thing that we could be doing. I think there was a lot of excitement around the impact of ETFs and what would happen once we had more financially distributed access to Ethereum, Bitcoin. And, it was very exciting. It's definitely a milestone, but I wouldn't say that it's nearly as impactful as we might have expected. So sort of in hard numbers, because a lot of the regular people that, we're trying to reach with Web3, right? Like empowering people to take control and agency of their lives, their money, their data. They're not necessarily the ones that were struggling to get access to Bitcoin and Ethereum prior to the ETF. So I think that there's like a lot more that we can be doing that's focusing on like, how do we get real people involved in Web3? And I don't think it only means having that conversation that's like into the night until 2 a.m. where you're convincing your friend why Ethereum is the best thing ever. Everybody needs that. I've had those conversations. That's how I got here. But I think that we need a little bit more focus on mature tooling, mature access points for people who are incredibly intelligent, right? People who come from maybe banking or engineering, or maybe they're coming from the traditional Web2 AI world and they're ready for Web3. And we need to have a really honest look at ourselves and say, what does this high quality contributor need to feel safe and meaningful in this ecosystem if they're going to dedicate their career to building here? And so that might look like developer tooling. It might look like documentation and guides. It might look like us rethinking the way that we are building some of our apps. I think it's unfortunate that even today, you open MetaMask or any app and you still have to switch networks. Sometimes you still have to bridge networks. So there's things like this that really do make the difference, right? Like imagine telling your Web2 friend, come onto Ethereum, you can buy this token, but then you're going to have to bridge it here. It's just so confusing. We lose people. And so really making sure that we're focused on the ways to grow the pie, whichever part of the pie you care about, I think is the most important thing right now.
Mm-hmm. We are heading into another election cycle in the US. When Donald Trump was first elected, many people were taken by surprise, in part due to information bubbles on Web2 platforms. How do you think Web3, particularly with decentralized data assets, can help address these issues and combat misinformation?
This is a really great question. And I think it's a difficult one, partially because I'm not American. So while I'm following the election, I don't have like the visceral feeling of what the impact of this kind of election has had on my life before or after. But I think that we are at a really important time. I think this year there's something like over 30 federal elections globally, over 100 elections worldwide. So it's been a really important year for democracy and being vocal about what you care about. And so I think it is important that people recognize sort of the trade-offs of when they vote, regardless of if it's sort of the US or their country, and kind of the timing of technology, because there is this sort of intersection that I feel like we're getting closer to of, AI, crypto, a lot of these technologies that empower humans and empower people are getting better and more accessible. And at the same time, there is a bit of a return to certain authoritarian regimes that we're starting to see globally. After sort of what felt like several decades of freedom or freedom ideologies, it feels a little bit like there are certain countries that are back to prioritizing those ways. And part of that makes sense because as you see your people gaining more freedom, I would expect that a tyrant to want to have more control. And so asking yourself in your election, what is the most important thing for your livelihood, for your children's livelihood? I don't think it means people have to be single issue voters, but I think it does mean having sort of a realistic look at like what has happened in the past elections or like the past regimes and what you want the world to look like now, given that we are at such a precipice for technological change. And making sure that, who you're voting for isn't necessarily going to hinder that future that you're also building towards.
Okay, thanks for your sharing and thank you for joining us today, Eva.
Thank you so much.